Ida. Really nice to meet you. And thanks for staying with us throughout the technical difficulties. I was already beautifully introduced, but I'll say again, my name is Marta. I work at Trustpilot. It's a website where you can find and write reviews for products, services, and businesses. I'm a full stack engineer there. I'm predominantly a web developer, but I had my moments of dabbling in things like building mobile apps as well. And yeah, so one of them was a feeling good app, but I also worked at People's Postcode Lottery before, and a couple of startups. I've always been interested in accessibility. It's something that I try to bring into every of my roles. And this summer, I got certified by the International Association of Accessibility Professionals. So kind of made it a bit more formal, if you like. So in the next, 35 minutes, less than that, so I'm going to try and go a bit faster. We're going to talk about why we should take HTML. Why is it something that we should take seriously? All of us, not just developers, but designers and content creators as well. We're going to look at some common semantic elements and mistakes that are often found on the things that we build. We're going to look then at some less common HTML elements. I'd like to give you a flavor of what's out there. And yeah, just talk about how we all have a role to play in it. So here we go. Who is this for? So you may be thinking that we're talking about elements of HTML. We're using some technical vocabulary, and you may be thinking that the contents of this presentation may only be for front-end developers. But I assure you that everyone who does anything that ends up anywhere near the user interface will hopefully find something useful in this presentation. So, whether you're a UX, UI, interaction designer, content creator, this is all relevant. Can we just do a quick show of hands? Who in this room is a developer? We've got a bunch, okay. A designer? We've got a few, okay. So I don't want to be kind of non-inclusive, but any other roles, any content folk? Fantastic, great, lovely. So we may have different roles, we do different things in our professional lives, but something that connects us is that we are all aliens in computer land. So let's start with this metaphor. I didn't go to school for computer science. They didn't teach coding at my English literature and languages program at university. But surely I spent a lot of time learning words, trying to make myself understood in the language which wasn't my own. So I'm kind of implicitly trained to do that. And the truth is that we are pretty bad at browser speak. And this is not just my feeling or observation. There is hard data to support it. WebAIM is an organization that yearly, since 2019, looks at 1 million of most popular websites and looks at their how they implement accessibility, or rather, how many errors there are on those websites. And they publish their report around March time each year. It makes for quite a spicy reading, I should say, because even though overall the tendency is that we are doing slightly better, we're still looking at, on average, 50 errors on an average page out of those 1 million pages. So this is quite a lot. This is quite significant. I think I moved something. I'm sorry. OK, we're back on. And so 50 errors per page, surely we can do better than that. There are there's a variety of them, but this table here shows you kind of what the kind of main contenders there are here. So low contrast text always wins, always the winner. Firmly in the 80% of homepages affected throughout the years. But the other ones, like missing alt text for images, empty links, problems with input labels, empty buttons, missing document language. These are all essentially HTML problems. And you may be asking why, and by the way, this is why in machine code. That's a very kind of lame dev joke. Why is that? So, as I said, I didn't study computer science, so I don't know whether computer science programs teach it. I have read code written by people who did computer science, and I can only infer that it's not taught really meticulously. So boot camps, I went through a boot camp. They surely don't do it. My experience with learning semantic HTML was kind of self-led and self-guided. And so I think there's a sense of HTML being something super basic, and it is basic. And we can all, well, those of us who have, we can go back to this moment when we wrote our first our first website, a little page. There's no way you could have done that without HTML. But I think this is a skill that was just really undervalued. So we certainly don't hire for it. I've been in many interviews for tech jobs, front-end led jobs, and sure enough, I'll be asked about some random JavaScript syntax, but it's very rare that you get questions asked about semantic HTML. And so I also think it's not really valued because the influencers in the tech scene, they focus on things that are much more complex. So, and in JavaScript ecosystem, it's almost like another day, another library, another tool, and this is what people go for. And it's accessibility folk who talk about basics a bit more, but I don't feel like these worlds necessarily cross over all the time. So I want to advocate that we should go back to basics, to fix the house, to not have, and also, if it was that basic, if it was that simple, we wouldn't have 50 accessibility issues per page on average. We wouldn't have that. So maybe we should change our view of it and think of it as a non-trivial matter. And it isn't a trivial matter, because if it was trivial, we wouldn't be in this situation at all. So yeah, going back to basics isn't necessarily a bad thing. And so yeah, let's start with what is HTML? So HTML, hypertext markup language, is a programming language, and it powers the internet. It's everywhere. As I said, it's impossible to write anything to put in the browser and not touching it in some way. So it is a programming language, although some tech bros on Twitter would argue that it isn't. It is declarative. It's just everywhere. The thing is that the image shows a very overblown Swiss Army knife. The thing is that we use certain elements of HTML, like the Swiss Army knife. We're just trying to make them work too hard, to do too much, and it just gets really confusing. And what I mean when I say semantic HTML, well, what you put in between those tags, those elements, they matter. So you don't call a dog a cat and expect it to meow, or you wouldn't take a spoon and try to cut your food with it. I mean, you can, but with varying results. You're not going to put flip-flops or high heels and go out hiking in the mountains unless you want, the rescue team to be really, really angry with you. So there's a similar thing with HTML. There is form and content. There is the semantic markup. These things mean something. But why should I care, you ask? Well, first and foremost, it is about accessibility, and there is absolutely no way to satisfy WCAG rules without knowing HTML. It is paramount for assistive technologies because they rely on semantic HTML to parse content. Secondly, if you want to create robust solutions, you need to do it, and you want to have less code to maintain, there you go. But also, 2025, there's a European Accessibility Act coming through, which will force a lot of us to pay much more attention to accessibility. And last but not least, there's the matter of SEO and optimizing for it. So, telling Google what is that it's dealing with and making its job easier. And the thing is that really the only way I see through it in order to fix the situation that we found ourselves in is to learn HTML, because ARIA won't fix it for you. So people think that, that slapping ARIA on top of, just sprinkling ARIA on top of things will make their products more accessible. But it's not true. And then again, there's data to support it. According to the WebAIM report that I mentioned earlier, whenever there was a correlation between ARIA present on the page and more, not less, accessibility violations. So that kind of shows that if we're adding those things nilly-willy, not really thinking about it, not being intentional about it, it's not going to help us. Then you may think, I can just use a component library. Surely there's people somewhere that have already been paid and spent a lot of time researching these things and building them properly. But again, a WebAIM report looks at Bootstrap and finds that whenever there was Bootstrap present, again, there were more accessibility issues. It doesn't necessarily mean that Bootstrap itself components of Bootstrap are accessible, but it almost feels like folk may be offloading those responsibilities to component libraries, but putting them together on the page still results in markup which is not semantic. So component libraries won't fix it for you. Automated accessibility testing won't fix it for you either, because in order to write tests that make sense and maintain them, you need to know what you're doing. And last but not least, AI won't fix it for you. Or maybe it will, don't at me, I don't know. But probably not anytime soon. Because if we think about AI looking at what's already out there, and what's already out there is broken, then how can it do a better job? So it's on us. So before we delve a bit more into what's what, let's look at the anatomy of an HTML element. So the little crab thing symbol is a tag. And then inside this tag we have element, and the element is the real meat. This is the thing that is semantic. This is what we should be looking at. And then it's in between the tags, and the tags differentiate the element from the proper content. And I used an image element in this example to show you what an attribute is. So an attribute is somewhat supportive to an element. And remember, since I'm here and I've got it up already, alt tag always needs to be present with an image element. It can be empty. It's more than fine for it to be empty, but it has to be present for assistive technologies to work properly. So a sausage dog dressed like a hot dog is not a hot dog. I mean, this is pretty obvious. So don't try eating your sausage dog, for the love of God. Don't put any mustard on it, because it's going to be really angry. And likewise, you don't really want to like walk your hot dog or like cuddle it. That would be weird. And in the same way, a div is not a button. It may look like one, but it certainly isn't one. What is a div? Well, a div and a span, well, they're kind of cousins. They're both generic containers. And div is for block content and span is for inline. And what I mean by that, and they're generic, so they don't mean anything. And I think our over-reliance on divs means that we're having a lot of these problems. So yeah, this is just a simple code example of what you can do with div. You can group elements and style them. And this is the point of it. It is made for making styling easier, not to convey any sort of functionality or semanticity, or semantics rather. And as I say, the span is basically a cousin of a div. So if you have a text and you want to style a certain part of that content within semantic HTML tags, you use a span, as you would here. We have a paragraph, and then we have a word in red, we have a word in blue, and a word in green. So yeah, nothing wrong with divs. Like, they are there for a reason. They have their role to play. But who likes to work overtime? Who likes to make their lives more difficult for themselves? And who just loves to make, just to have more work than necessary? Some accessibility advocates think or say that developers who don't learn HTML properly, they say that they're lazy. But if you think about it, lazy developers are the best developers. They automate everything. They don't over-engineer. They do as little as possible, which is, not over-bloating their solutions. But when I look at these two pieces of code, who is working harder? Like, obviously, when you're using a div, you have to not only bind, the two event listeners for on-click and key down, you have to add an ARIA role of button, and you have to add a tab index. That's so much code already. And why would you work so hard yourself? And why would you make your team work so hard to maintain it if you can have all of that with just a button? You don't need to bind any extra events. You don't need to add a role, because it's implicitly there, because it's made to be doing it. And since we are with buttons, let's just do a quick one. Because links and buttons, these seem to cause a lot of trouble for developers. And again, WebAIM report talks about it. So the problem that's often found is that they're so-called empty. And what that means, they're lacking text, which would help screen reader users or assistive technology users to know what the action actually is. And that is often because we often use either icons or images that are wrapped in those elements, and then we either don't take care of them properly via ARIA or through alt tag, or we just skip the text altogether. So they result in being accessibility errors, and the layer of kind of semanticity between these two, I feel like I see that they're often used interchangeably, but the truth of the specification is that a link goes somewhere or takes the user somewhere. You leave the context of the page that you're on, whereas the button does something on the page. You're staying kind of locally on your page. It's an action in there. Another important thing is headings. And why are they important? Well, they're used by screen reader users for navigation. And again, problems with headings is another huge issue according to the WebAIM report. So the case of hierarchy. Are there any Succession fans in the room? Anyone? Oh, thank God, because otherwise this example makes absolutely no sense. But so the hierarchy of the headings is that on the very top we have heading level 1, the most important heading, the Logan Roy of headings, if you will, and he's the boss of Waystar Royco. Like you can't have any of his children kind of going before him and like taking his role. He's got 3 children, all of them useless, but they are nonetheless heading level 2s. Because they're his, by virtue of being Logan's children. But then underneath Shiv, you've got Tom, her husband, and we're talking like the first 2 seasons or 3 seasons, then things change, whatever. And then you've got cousin Greg. You can't possibly have cousin Greg under Logan. Like that just wouldn't work in Succession. And similarly, it doesn't work for semantic HTML. We need to have the hierarchy, and it can be nested. So you can nest. You could potentially nest, I don't know, Kendall's assistant under Kendall, or maybe what's this guy's name, Stewie, perhaps, you know. But the hierarchy needs to stay clear, and we go from H1 to H6. And when talking of components which are kind of typography-based, here's one for you, for designers. So when I'm thinking of design systems that are kind of potential possibilities for beautiful collaborations between designers and developers, to make things easier, to make things streamlined, what sometimes happens is that designing those typography components really tightly couples the style and the semantic element. So we always have, we have a style of like quite a large element. So that's kind of automatically H1 or H2. But it doesn't always work like that. So in order for our designs to be flexible and for our design systems to be flexible and kind of fit for the future and changing requirements, what we can do is we can allow for the semantic value, for the semantic element to be overridden. And then that opens up, sure, it opens up a possibility of some mess, but also it opens up the possibility of, trusting your developers to know what they're doing and giving them that opportunity to apply it in a way that's necessary. Similarly with, when you're coding up an icon element, so supplying the area label and then, or area hidden, either or, just giving these options to developers is really important. And just because something's hidden, it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And what I mean by that, well, think about when you're designing something, you're not designing just for a sighted user. So you may want to have the slickest interface in mind, which has very little text, not many visible headings, anything like that. So for the sighted user, that would probably be okay, although it may have some other problems. But for a screen reader user, that just wouldn't work. So what you can do, you can still design those elements in, you can still include them, but just use CSS to hide them. So visually they won't be visible, but they'll be there. They'll be there in the DOM tree. They will be able to be accessed by assistive technologies. And content creators, you think deeply about information architecture anyway, so you're probably very much on board with structuring content in a great way. So now let's just breathe in, breathe out, because I'm going to talk about a few more elements, and it may get a little technical, but we'll be fine. We'll be fine. So, here is an example. I don't know if you can see it really well, but we have a footer of the company BP in Poland, and in its footer, they're sharing their contact details. And yeah, sorry, you probably can't see it, but what we have here is we have a heading level 3 to kind of give it its section title, I believe. And then you have a heading level, you've got 2 heading level 6. Yeah, you can't see it, but trust me, it's there. So not only do we have, it makes little sense, but also we have a problem with those headings, right? Because we're going from 3 to 6. And also, you know, having our address as a heading is an interesting choice. So in order to remedy that, you could use, hey, an address element. It does exist. So this is just a little taster, but by using the address element, you can mark it up properly. An assistive technology user, you know, navigating through the page, they'll be directed straight there if this is what they're looking for. And by the way, this goes not just for postal address, but you can use it for emails, for, you know, any kind of contact details. So it is very flexible like that. And then you can use spans and divs to style them, because this is what they're made for. Another example, I love secondhand shopping, and I spend way too much time like just combing through eBay, Vinted, and you know, and such. And I spend way too much time doing this, and I love it dearly. But looking at Vinted's website and their markup was a very sad experience for me, because in order to convey the information about, God knows what it was. I think it was like a jumpsuit I was looking at. I opened up DevTools and I saw that it's just divs, 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 divs. So for key value pairs, they use divs. That obviously doesn't really make sense. If a user of assistive technology were to go through this page, it would be just quite a confusing experience. And again, this can be remedied by a definition list. So, you know, an element which you can use for key value pairs, you can use for glossaries, you know, things like that. So you have a DL element that then has 2 children, the first one being definition title, so like brand. By the way, you don't have to write in caps lock, you can do that in CSS, but I was just doing it quickly. And then the DD is the actual description. So this is a very, you know, a very useful thing that can be used to kind of give those divs a bit of a rest. And finally, this example, this is a progress bar, and I took this from the website that teaches you like 20 CSS methods for progress bar, and like obviously you need to add some JS, but okay, so you spend time writing code for 20 different ways for a progress bar, and okay, we have some sort of a heading, but then we have a div again, when there is actually a proper progress element that we could be using. So again, to help our users know what they're dealing with, and we can style them. You know, there isn't a different, I mean, there isn't much of a difference styling a progress element versus styling a, you know, a div, you know. If you know, this is just CSS, so you can just use that. And, and I can go over and over again. You can all go to sleep and, be very bored. And I understand nobody wants to learn like over 100 elements by heart because it sucks. And like we've got lives. And yeah, like just reading specs over and over is probably not a fun way to gain this knowledge. But there are some strategies I'd like to share with you. So I guess this is both for designers and developers, but mostly developers, is to draw on paper and read the docs. So when you get your component in Figma from your designer, don't start coding it straight away. Spend some time with it. Just draw on paper first and think. What is this section? What is that? What possible ingredients can there be here? And frankly, there's an app for anything, and similarly, there's an HTML element for many, many things. So if you have an inkling that something that you're seeing there may be of semantic value, go into docs, have a look. Another thing to do is to code bare HTML first, and like add all the gimmicks, bells and whistles later. Don't start with it. Start with just bare bones. And you can always check HTML validity, and there are many ways to do it. There is Lighthouse, there are HTML validators. If you're using Storybook, you can use that too. And one way to also kind of broaden your perspective of what other elements there are out there, you can just snoop on other websites, because these tools will run on anything. So go and don't rely on them being correct. It's not about that. It's more like a safari, more like an exploration. Go to the BBC website, but then go to other websites and see how are others doing, what are others doing. And this is really about just gaining this exposure, just so that you don't have to kind of learn everything by heart, day in and day out. And finally, use a screen reader on what you've written. And this is a very eye-opening experience. Something to mention is that obviously you won't be using a screen reader in a way that a person who is a common user of assistive technologies will use it. So, don't feel that pressure. But because screen readers use semantic HTML, you will have to understand and navigate the content, you'll have a very good idea of what is wrong really, really quickly. So if you do all these things, what is the prize? Well, you have less code to maintain, for sure, and your solutions will be more robust, and kind of what you see is what you get. Your code kind of gets self-documenting because you're attaching that, you're baking in that semantics in it. And last but not least, and this is really why we're all here, your users will be able to use the stuff that you built in an equitable way and have not just a comparable, but as equivalent experience as possible to those sighted users that we often only think about. So here's a bunch of resources. Take pictures, or if there are some really, really good ones here, and some of them are not boring. They're actually quite fun. So, like, if you ever saw Hayden Pickering's work, it's like great. My T-shirt is from him, actually. It's like a lot of nested divs. Fantastic. He does great stuff. And I think I'd like to leave you with that. So thank you for bearing with me. You've been great. And before you go, just have a think. This is what I want to leave you with. This question of what is one thing, just one thing, that you can do today or tomorrow after you leave the WasteConf to improve your HTML practice. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marta, for this presentation. Please remember, just a little reminder, that you can ask questions via Slido. So, of course, also I can reach out to you. I see no questions at Slido. So, do you have any questions? I have some, but I don't want to take the stage. Yeah, I see some.
Hi, thank you so much. I really enjoyed the talk. As a intermediate web developer, I think it's really interesting seeing the trends of how you mentioned in 2019 there were some issues with sites, and over time it sounds like maybe it's improving. What are your thoughts on platforms like Webflow and other no-code platforms, and any thoughts on how they might be improving the situation with semantic HTML over time?
Yeah, thank you for this question. Really interesting one. So I'm not really aware, but then again, I'm not in the Webflow community, so this is something I would have to look into. But I would imagine that just like with WordPress or any type of building websites, there will be an accessibility community attached to it somehow, right? So there will be folk that will be interested in it and that will engage with it, which will, well, I believe would result in in that kind of corner of the internet with good accessibility practice. But then because without knowledge, without awareness, I don't think Webflow's gonna save the world, to be honest. I would be quite interested to know your thoughts about it, so we can have a chat later.
Okay, thank you so much. Do we have any more questions? Do I see any raised hands? Okay, I think I'm gonna have one, because I see a little space for that, because I fully agree with your premise, although I know how the practice looks. Unless you make something an important part of your web development process, unless you make this, semantic HTML ingrained into development process, it's not happening because developers don't care enough. So my question is, when you want to push something, especially in a bigger company, you really need to have good arguments. So what is the one argument whenever another developer comes to you, whenever business comes to you, and business always tells you faster, 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 and So what is the one argument I can use talking with these people? Because I need one strong argument.
I would say probably the 2025 European Accessibility Act is a good one. Yeah, because if you hit them with legal, they can't do anything, right?
Okay.
And this is necessarily one of the, semantic HTML is one of the kind of, ingredients you get for free. I mean, for free, you need to train your team, obviously, but, you need to invest in that, but you have to, if you do automated testing, you need to invest in that, whatever you do, you have to invest in. There are really good free resources on it, and this can be probably pretty much taught in-house if you set it up correctly. So I would say, yeah, probably
just scare them off with legal stuff.
Sorry?
Scare them off with legal stuff.
Yeah, of course.
Surely, thank you.
I mean, yeah, I would like to live in the world where the kind of the ethical argument is predominant and paramount, but we're pragmatism.
Yep.
We're pragmatic here.
That's why my
right?
question, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank
I think this is a good answer. Any more questions? So, thank you so much.
Thank you very
Huge round
much.
of applause. Thank you.
Cheers.